We're now rapidly approaching the end of John's Gospel. We're in chapter 21, and we've come to the part where Jesus reinstates Peter. I'm going to read to you from John 21, verse 15 to 19. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep." And the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things, that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, that when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, "Follow me." Here we have an important passage which undoes some of the damage which was done previously by Peter's denial of Jesus Christ. You remember that back in John's Gospel, see if I can find the passage here, Jesus predicts Peter's denial. We're looking at John chapter 13. And in verse 37, Peter says, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." And then Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? I tell you the truth, before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. Now, we saw that take place shortly after Jesus was arrested. And it took place, let's have a look, Jesus before Pilate. Peter's first denial occurred in John 18, verse 15. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back and spoke to the girl on duty there and brought Peter in. "Surely you're not going to this another of these man's disciples?" the girl at the door asked Peter. And he replied, "I'm not." And it was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire that they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. And then later on in John 18, as Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, "Surely you're not another of his disciples?" And he denied it, saying, "I am not." And one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, "Didn't I see you in the olive grove?" And again Peter denied it. And at that moment a cock began to crow. Well, here we have the form of restitution that Jesus applies here. Just as the denial was done on 3 occasions, so we find that Jesus asks Simon to state his commitment 3 times, as if each of the commitments of love for Jesus would cross out each of the denials. 3 for 3. So when they had finished eating, Jesus says to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" Now, first of all, we have to understand the setting, because you can see from this setting that Jesus is not talking to Simon Peter in front of all the others. Rather, they are walking off together somewhere. You can see that from the end in verse 20, where Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them, straight on from this discourse. So you have to picture the scene where they finished eating, and Jesus says to Peter, "Follow me." And they go for a walk along the beach. And they're on their own, being trailed at some distance by John, who is wondering what's going on. Maybe John could overhear the conversation and was hanging back a little bit. Maybe that's why we have the words here, because John was there at the time. But there we have Simon Peter and Jesus walking away from the other disciples. And Jesus says to him, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" Now, what's the these here? I think that these are the other disciples. I think the idea here is that Peter is so committed to Christ, is so centered on Jesus, and so puts Jesus first as the most important thing and person in his life, that his commitment was stronger than all of the others. And Peter probably considered that his strength. Peter probably considered that his commitment was stronger than all of the others, and may have made some comment about that. The idea that people knew that no matter what, Peter would back Jesus, would follow Jesus regardless of whatever happened. And yet here he shows weakness in denying him 3 times. Jesus says to him, "Do you truly love me more than these? Is your commitment to me even stronger than all of these other disciples? Is that truly the case? Are you truly more committed?" And Peter could not but help remember that there's unfinished business between Jesus and him. He had denied his Lord not once but 3 times. And that hangs between them. That's something which Peter would feel intensely guilty about in his relationship with Christ. Something which would be a barrier now between them. Peter would feel totally inadequate to meet his Lord's gaze, understanding the way in which he felt he had betrayed him, almost as bad as Judas in the way in which he had denied him. That must have been Peter's feelings here. But Jesus deals with that barrier as he deals with all barriers between himself and others. And he deals with it by directly confronting that barrier. And that barrier is then pushed to one side by Jesus saying, "Do you truly love me more than these?" Why would he ask that question? Because both of them know that although on the surface there is this huge commitment to Christ, nevertheless, he has denied him. Do you truly love me more than these? And Peter can now say from the other side of that terrible set of denials, yes, I do love you. You know that I love you. And he appeals to Jesus' own knowledge of him. Jesus doesn't contradict him. Jesus agrees with him. Yes, Jesus knows Peter. And he knows the rest of us too, because we're all weak in that sense. And for this reason, Peter is an important character to all of us. because it shows that even when we are weak, even when we are denying Christ by some actions or things or thoughts that we do, that there is still restitution possible. And here you have Jesus restoring him. He doesn't contradict him. He doesn't say, well, you didn't love me, did you? Do you love me is the question. Peter says yes. And the consequence is not, I don't believe you. The consequence is, then feed my lambs. What's that about? Feed my lambs? This is saying, take the role of the shepherd. The disciples here, we've seen, are purposeless at the moment. The disciples don't have a leader for them. I am leaving, and you are to be that leader. You are the one to be the shepherd. If you love me, then you need to provide them with the purpose that they need to have. You need to provide the direction. You provide the leadership because you have that natural leadership qualities, and people will follow you. They followed you into the water to do the fishing. They will follow you as leader of the church. That's Jesus' special commission to Peter. A restoration, one of the barriers taken away. Again, as they walk along, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? A repetition of the same question is an expression of, should I doubt this? Is it a doubting? But it's not really a question of doubt here. This is not asking a question a second time because you're not sure of the answer the first time. This has got a deliberate purpose of reminding Peter of the second denial that he gave. And Peter's response is the same. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He's appealing to Christ's own knowledge of him, that which is undeniable, therefore. Giving testimony in your own cause, yes, I love you, is not sufficient in this case. He appeals to Jesus' own understanding of his nature and his character. You know that I love you, and though I denied you because of weakness and stupidity and foolishness, nevertheless my settled condition is that I love you. And that's a comfort again for us, because it's occasions that Christians stumble, they fall, they do foolish things, they do things which are wrong and sinful. But it doesn't mean that the settled condition is not one of love for Jesus. We all fall and stumble, as Peter does. That's why Peter is so important to us, because Peter represents every one of us here who stumbles and falls. Jesus said, take care of my sheep, which means your role again is to be the shepherd. You are the leader of the flock, and give them purpose, give them direction. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? There's a slight variation in words here. Before it was, do you truly love me? Do you truly love me? And now it's, do you love me? Some people have made the case that this kind of lower standard, do you even just love me, may have been what prompted Peter to be particularly hurt. But the fact that he's asking him of a lower level of it, do you even love me at a lower level, not just truly love me, do you just love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? There may be something in that. One can't be sure. But my personal feeling is that Peter knows exactly what Jesus is doing. And the third time echoes the third denial. And Jesus, by asking him 3 times and reinstating him 3 times, is reminding Peter of probably that most painful of all the episodes of his life, the 3 denials. And on that third occasion, it's like he hammer homes the fact that although they didn't mention the denial here, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And Peter was hurt because the third time. I think also there may be that there's this term filio. It's a different quality of love here as to the others. Do you even like me? Might have been the phrase here. Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Again, the appeal is to Jesus' own knowledge. And that is sufficient because Jesus knows all things. And you cannot hide then my true feelings for you. And Jesus doesn't contradict them. But having questioned him 3 times, he has been restored 3 times, and his answer has been accepted 3 times. It's an object lesson, a painful one for Peter, but one which removes all those barriers between Peter and himself. Jesus accepts the answer. This time, Jesus also says, feed my sheep, which is play the role of the shepherd, be the leader, provide the direction, give them purpose in the commission which I've given to you. And what's more, he says, and I know that you love me, because you will eventually be called upon to give up your life for me, in the same way that I was called upon to give up my life for you and for others. I know that as a fact, that your faithfulness and your love will win through in the end. And he tells him this prophecy or story. I tell you the truth that when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. You had complete control and self-autonomy. But when you are old, we're talking years off here, maybe 10, 20, 30 years hence, when you are old, Peter, after a period of time has elapsed, then you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. When someone else dresses you and leads you where you do not want to go, you're not in control. You are a prisoner under their control, under their direction, and they can do with you what they want. This is the same way that they dealt with Jesus. They took him by force and forcefully executed him on the cross. And this is Jesus' metaphorical way of telling Peter the same thing will happen to him. People will come and take you by force. You may resist all you like, but it will do no good, because they will do with you what they want to do, just as they've done with me. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. In other words, the death would not be a peaceful death lying in bed as an old man coming to the end of his days, even as we assume that happened to John, that he wasn't persecuted in that way, but rather you will be forcefully taken and you will be put to death by other forces and other powers. And you will be executed in the same way that I was. That's how I know your faithfulness and your love for me, because that will happen to you and you will not deny me that time. This act of denial which took place has been expunged. It has been removed. And that will be seen so clearly in the fact that you will be faithful even unto death, and you will not deny me any more. By which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, follow me. If there's any doubt in the disciples' mind as to who this character was on the shore, all of that would be dispensed with here. Only Jesus could talk to Peter like that. Only one man in the entire world would have that deeper insight and that knowledge of their relationship, the fracture of denial and the restoration. This is not some stranger on the shore, to quote Acker-Bilk. This is the one person that Peter loves and has strong connections with, to the point that he will give up his life for him. A different future is laid out for the other disciple, the disciple Jesus loves, and we'll see that next time.